Shields go up, shields come down, blast shields! Interwebs, and welcome to my review of Star Trek Lower Decks Episode 2, Envoys. Well, last episode was quite a joy. I gave it a very, very positive review for the pilot of this new animated comedy Star Trek venture, but was the second episode just as good? Well, like I did last week, for those of you who may not have seen the episode or are living in another country that sadly isn't getting the episodes of Star Trek Lower Decks yet, I'm going to give my spoiler-free thoughts up front, then get a little bit more into my spoiler thoughts on the episode. There's so many moments in this episode that feel very funny, feel like it's prodding Star Trek and kind of being look at that, that's weird and strange and out there, right? That's all something we as Star Trek fans just acknowledge as weird, and yet never feels like it breaks the universe of Star Trek. In fact, there's a few moments in this episode, again without spoiling, that really feel like, oh, this is what Star Trek's all about. And yeah, it's played for a funny moment, but it also warms your heart at the same time. And it just, I don't know, it's one of those, I am very much a proponent of, Star Trek doesn't always need to be positive. I like the kind of parts of Star Trek, like in Discovery and Picard, or even Deep Space Nine, where it gets darker in order to bring us back to the light. I definitely totally understand that, and definitely agree with that, and definitely feel that, but it's also very refreshing to just have a show that's just, reveling in, the weird, unique, belief in the positivity of humanity in the way that is kind of weird. And I don't think the other Star Trek shows are cynical. I do think they get dark, but this show just feels so freshly positive in a way the old Next Generation really was. And again, that's not knocking those shows and what Discovery and Picard do, because I do love them, but I do love that there's this diversity of Trek that we kind of get this show, and it is nice to really just have that feeling in this show again, in a way that, again, is poking fun at it, prodding it, but never breaks it in such a beautiful way. And the other thing, too, that I was really, really worried about, and this is my last spoiler-free thought, I was worried that, this is very funny, this feels very Star Trek, but I worried that the characters were starting to feel a little bit too archetypical, they were just vehicles for comedy, rather than actually just being actual characters themselves. They were just, comedic archetypes of, Mariner is cool cat, but doesn't necessarily follow all the rules, and Boimler is very much the by-the-book kind of guy, and those sort of archetypes we've seen before in these characters. So I was a little bit worried that they'd seem too archetypical, but the way the episode ends, again without spoiling, just it made me really just go aw and really feel touched in a way I didn't really expect to. And yeah, sure, there's a lot more room for growth for these characters in the way that maybe Futurama, for example, did, a comedic show that really hit me hard in the feels a lot of times. But the fact that this show still got me those moments of oh, that's super sweet this early in the game after 2 episodes, just felt so encouraging. For just really building this show out, for making it feel like real characters even amongst the comedy, and I'm absolutely enjoying that. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts. I can't really say too much more without actually talking about some of the nitty-gritty stuff in this episode. So if you haven't seen Star Trek Lower Decks Episode 2 yet, you can stop here, or if you don't care about spoilers, you can keep going from here, but I am going to start spoiling the rest of Star Trek Lower Decks Episode 2 from here on out. So let's just jump right into it. So let's talk first about Rutherford's story. Rutherford and kind of Tendi in there too. I really like that, again, starting to pay off what we started to see in Episode 1, there's definitely a sort of burgeoning relationship between Rutherford and Tendi. This sort of hints that they really kind of fit each other very well. But I do like that we start to get, the ending of Episode 1 with Rutherford and Tendi kind of showed that they were very similar in a lot of ways, kind of being super competent nerds. And I was worried that might make them too similar. And so I like that this episode for both of them kind of differentiated them a little bit. I liked that Tendi is kind of naive, that she thought it was okay to ask Rutherford to change his whole career. And I liked that Rutherford was just such a sweet human being that he would do this for this person. That's a very Starfleet trait. He just wants to do good for other people, not really thinking of himself. He's very selfless in that way. And so I totally could see I was something I would do and make myself uncomfortable in order to please someone else, because that's just a very kind thing to do, but not necessarily healthy for yourself. But I also loved that it set Rutherford on this really fun path of getting to explore all the different like types of command and different areas of the ship, which I think does a really brilliant job introducing the audience not only to like the characters, like we got to meet Ransom, we got to meet the security officer, we got to meet the doctor, so it was sort of like a little backdoor way into getting us to meet some of the senior staff who are the background characters in the show, but at least we get a chance to like get to know a little bit about their personalities in this. And I also liked that it built off of, kind of course corrected a little bit off of last episode, where a lot of the senior officers last episode felt very, I want to say, arrogant, smug, kind of full of themselves a little bit. And in this episode, all of those characters were very like the fact that like Ransom, the basically first officer, took time to teach Rutherford basically the Kobayashi Maru test, that he would take time out of his day to do that for Rutherford, just a lowly ensign. That's sweet that he would have time for him, even though he's a busy first officer. And the fact that, again, we get these wonderful scenes, and this is kind of what I was alluding to in my spoiler-free discussion. I just like the moments of the couple moments in this episode where Rutherford's like, I think I want to try some new things, and it's played up as like this moment's like, oh, they're gonna say like, how dare you, and be very offended, but no, they're like, no, that's cool. Oh, you're gonna have so much fun. Go out and explore yourself, learn, and like that's such a Starfleet ideal and so sweet. And like Starfleet's like, oh, of course, expand your horizons, try new things, go out and do new things. And I it's very funny. It is a sending up of that trope of Star Trek, but again, it's this weird thing because this show has to walk this very fine line of like being funny and poking fun at the tropes of Star Trek, but not deconstructing it. Because I feel like if you do something like Zack Snyder, Man of Steel, Superman, where you deconstruct the character of Superman, it breaks what that character is within the universe of the character, and so it kind of ruins what makes it special. You're like breaking the toys in universe, so we can't play with them anymore. And this show is walking that line really, really wonderfully of being able to send up these tropes of Star Trek, like people being like overly encouraging and like being too like, yeah, do whatever you want to do, yeah, it's totally fine, go transfer, try new things. Like it is sending that up and making fun of it in a way, but never breaking it. It never feels like it's too much in the episode. And I just love how all the characters just in Rutherford's sequences just feel so encouraging. And then that ending scene with him and Tendi, and they're in the Jeffries tubes, and he's found himself, and he's like looking at the Jeffries tubes walls, and Tendi's like looking at the pulsar or whatever it is that she's looking at, and they're both like saying it's beautiful. I thought that was I literally went, oh, that's really sweet. And again, like I was talking about, it just made me connect with these two as characters, like actually seeing the humanity in them, not just the archetypical vehicles for comedy that they could easily fall into, and kind of what I was feeling through most of the episode. So I just liked that it paid off in a very human way, in a way that made me like hit me in the feels a little bit. Again, it's not on the level of like, you know, Futurama sometimes would like punch me in the gut with feelings, but I feel like this show has the potential to get there. And that's super, super encouraging and makes me super excited. But the meat of this episode is obviously, again, still focused on Mariner and Boimler, their conflict and their tension between the two of them is very much the heart of this show. And I just really love that the impetus of them basically like bringing this Klingon down to the planet just gets this moment, again, highlighting the conflict between the two of them, of Mariner just, she knows her stuff, she knows what to do, but she's much more laid back about it. And Boimler's like, by the book, knows all the regulations, knows how to do these things, but he just doesn't have any actual lived experience in being on the ground. And that, again, matches perfectly on some Star Trek ideas, like Star Trek characters I feel like they would be kind of uptight and full of themselves, but not really know how to handle themselves, like Boimler, like in an actual situation, just being so nerdy. It's like, I know all the answers, but not lived experience. And again, that is kind of archetypical. But again, I'll get to that in a second, but it pays off in the end, and again, a really character-focused way, not in an archetypical comedic kind of way. But again, I like that this vehicle of story just gets into this really interesting way of like we get to little stops into different like slices of like little Kronos and essentially like little Risa and little Andoria, and again setting up some of those like funny Starfleet Star Trek tropes. I love that Mariner meeting with the Klingon guy. It was very much like a send up of kind of Jadzia Dax, like Starfleet officers, Starfleet female officers who like are really tough, and like Klingons like apparently really love the badass Starfleet women characters, and I just love her rapport. Like, there's that wonderful lines like, I need to tell you about all my sexual conquest, and she's like, oh, all 2 of them? My review could just be me listing off all the funny jokes that I found in this episode, it's just hard for me to like do reviews sometimes. It's like, I like that joke, that was funny. I like that joke, that was funny. Getting into it, like, I liked Little Kronos. We got the Klingon lady talking to them, that like, what I liked about the Klingon lady talking, she sounded like the Duras sisters, like she's speaking through those prosthetic teeth that the Duras sisters kind of had, so they had to talk like this. Even though it's animation, clearly they didn't need to do that, but they replicated that sort of like way the Klingons, like the Duras sisters talked, like through the teeth, the like prosthetic teeth, and it was just a nice like subtle touch. The Risa section, again playing up like kind of the Roddenberry, like he was open about sex sort of thing. Roddenberry's very open about sex. If you don't know that, like Gene Roddenberry is very much like let's add sex to everything kind of guy, and so Risa was kind of making fun of that. But we got like the like typical like, oh, she's gonna like lay eggs in you sort of thing that we would see all the time in episodes like The Child of The Next Generation, or even on Enterprise, the episode where like Trip got pregnant accidentally. So setting up that trope. When they went to Andoria, you got shapeshifters, which I believe the alien that was shapeshifting there, I forget the exact name of the alien. I think they referenced it in the episode. They said it, the Andorians said it quickly, but that was an alien from Star Trek the Animated Series briefly before it like slipped out the window. So I'm liking that we're getting some animated series references in there. Something else too, I liked that they had like a tangential Discovery reference in Rutherford's story, by the way, where Rutherford is like an engineer and he was tinkering. He's like, oh yeah, healing up the body is just like a computer, which is kind of reminiscent of Jet Reno way back in season 2, episode 1 of Star Trek Discovery. So there's even some Discovery references in here, like even the shot where like Rutherford's fighting and he sits back up and the camera sort of follows him as he sits back up in that sort of very kung fu-esque kind of John Wickian style that Discovery kind of likes when it shoots its fight sequences. So even though this is a TNG era kind of show, there are still references to modern Trek and Discovery in like subtle stylistic ways. So there's like little hints of modern Trek in TNG. It's not just full like TNG references only here. So I do enjoy that like melding of the two here. This is one of the things in the episode that I almost balked at, because there's that last scene between Mariner and Boimler where they come across the Ferengi, and it was very hysterical, very much like humans. He's even doing the greedy hand human things, and the line I love was like, "Give me all your profits." It was just one of those nonsensical but very funny kind of like in-jokian Star Trek thing, like Ferengi always say the word profit, and so I just like that it was very much playing up the like TNG. Like very bad, very like comedic versions of the Ferengi that we kind of knew from The Next Generation way back in like the Outpost when we first met the Ferengi in The Next Generation. But I literally wrote in my notes, this feels a bit racist, like after we had met the Ferengi in Deep Space Nine and they had been so well built out as a culture, and like we still see them, they're still played for laughs here and there, but they have a much more in-depth culture to the Ferengi within Deep Space Nine rather than they were in Next Generation. So I was a bit like, it was disappointing to kind of see the stereotypical version of the Ferengi here, and kind of Boimler being a little bit racist towards the Ferengi, which is an arc we saw Sisko go through in Deep Space Nine. So I'm like, oh, that feels like a little bit of the lazy way out. It doesn't feel like, it rubbed me a little bit the wrong way in the moment, but I was laughing at it, but it still kind of was like, I don't know, this might be a little bit too deconstruction-y of Star Trek rather than fitting within the canon of Trek. But again, even the show is aware of it and pays off beautifully in a character way when we learn that Mariner was friends with that Ferengi and did that, had that like Ferengi play up being the comedic stereotype that a lot of Starfleet characters would know before they got to know Ferengi, like Sisko did in Deep Space Nine, that she did it so that Boimler could feel like he did something and feel like he actually was useful and actually got to be the person who handled the situation, and she let herself be embarrassed publicly in order to care for Boimler. And it was a very sweet moment. And again, this brilliant towing of the line of sending up the tropes of Star Trek, the like, haha, greedy humans, like jokey Ferengi, with the actual in-depth, like actual deep, rich character and lore that the Star Trek universe offers when we get to see the Ferengi being real, like Quark and Rom and Nog that we got to see in Deep Space Nine, and doing it in a way that colors the characters in a really deep way. Like showing Mariner is willing to publicly embarrass herself to care for her friend and to do something for her friend who was kind of beating himself up. He worked so hard and he just wasn't succeeding, and she gave him that. And that's just super sweet. So yeah, I it was so funny in this episode. Like, I'm not just saying this. Like, literally, I was trying to find things to be critical of. I was like, literally, like, what am I critical of in this episode? What doesn't work for me? And every time I literally wrote a note, that point was addressed later in the episode, and it just shocked me. And I gotta say, I adored this episode. It was funny. It was a great comedy, but it felt like true to Star Trek and true to characters in so many beautiful ways, and gave me characters that I really am starting to. It's only been 2 episodes and half-hour episodes at that, and I certainly have a long way to go before I care about them as much as I do, like, Saru or Tilly or, Jadzia Dax or all the characters that I love, but I can see them getting there. And the fact that a Star Trek show has done that after 2 episodes, which is 2 half-hour episodes, we have less of these characters than we did after 1 episode of Next Generation Encounter at Farpoint, the 2-hour episode. And I feel more for these characters already than I did in TNG after just watching Encounter at Farpoint. Now, obviously, I cared for TNG characters well after that more, but the fact that this show is so efficient, so smart, so economical with its time, and yet feels like it's doing so much with so little time, I'm finding it hard pressed. I'm honestly, I'm not trying to be like, I'm CBS shill, like, gonna only talk positive about modern Trek. Like, I'm trying to be critical, and I got nothing. I think the literal only thing I can really think about so far is maybe it's a bit too frenetic pace, but that's a taste thing. I kind of like it, but for some people, like my roommate, he thinks it's a bit too frenetic. That's cool. That's a taste thing. So for me, it works fine. And so I can't be really critical of that, but I understand it being a taste thing for others. The comedy is always also up for taste debate, so comedy may vary for, whatever you're feeling. Again, that's a taste thing, not really a, kind of objective thing I could really kind of do. The only thing that I could maybe be objective about is I'm curious how this show plays to Trek fans who have never seen an episode of Star Trek, or only kind of know Trek through cultural osmosis rather than actually having watched a lot of Star Trek. So I'm curious for non-Trek fans if this is really going to be the show that gets them in. Because I feel like that's what they're trying to do with the show, is it being like the thing to get people into Star Trek who may not always have been into Star Trek. But there's just so much that feels very like sending up of like jokes that we get, like the Ferengi joke. I feel like the Ferengi joke at the end of this episode feels very grounded in knowing a lot about Star Trek, that I'm curious to see how this plays for non-Trek fans. I'm not saying it's bad, but I am curious about it. So if you're a non-Trek fan out there who's just gotten into the show, I don't know, maybe you're just coming across my review, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on that, because that's really the only like potential negative that I could see. And it's not even a negative for me. It's a possible negative going out there. So I've ranted for almost as long as the episode is. So I think I'll wrap up my review here. But what did you think, all of you, about the second episode of Star Trek Lower Decks? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Don't forget, if you want more reviews of Star Trek Lower Decks, more discussions of Star Trek and other geek fandoms and topics and social issues and political issues through geek topics, don't forget to give this channel a subscribe. I do some podcasts, one where I do a Farscape rewatch with Council of Geeks, another LGBTQ-focused geek YouTuber called What the Frel. Check out that podcast. A Star Trek RPG comedy podcast, like Dungeons & Dragons comedy podcast. That's called Star Trek Behind the Lines. You can also find that in your podcast feeds. And also I have a Patreon. If you want to help make this channel even better, please support me over on Patreon. It really means I can do all the stuff that I do on this channel. But regardless of if you subscribe, you comment, you listen to my podcast, all the way too many things that I do, I'm just glad that you stopped by. I'm glad we got to talk about Trek together. And I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, and a special thank you to Piston Twisted Garage, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmas, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Alexander Miller, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Mouse Pounder, Jemshin, Susan Banks, Wellington Marcus, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, John Stell, Gavin Robinson, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Jason Knott, Maeve, Stephen Clinard, Zach Cody, Subraxis, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Dante St. James, Gretchen Badger, Polly Mina, Din Hagney, and Bree Beecher. Thank you so much to all of you. I could not do this without you, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.